For almost 200 years, a single power rose from the Deccan Plateau to challenge empires and completely reshape the Indian subcontinent. Today, we're unpacking the epic story of the rise and fall of the Maratha Empire.
And it all starts with one huge, audacious question. How did a rebellion born in the rugged hills of western India and led by just one brilliant chieftain grow big enough to challenge and ultimately shatter the authority of the mighty Mughal Empire? Well, the answer starts with a name that really echoes through Indian history: Shivaji.
All right, so to really get our heads around this incredible story, we're going to walk through 5 key chapters. We'll start with Shivaji's revolutionary kingdom, then move to the rise of the Peshwas, see the empire at its absolute peak, witness its tragic collapse, and finally, we'll look at the fearsome military legacy it left behind. Okay, let's dive right in. Our story has to begin with the foundation that Shivaji laid. He didn't just build a kingdom, he was forging an identity, and it was all built on this incredibly powerful, revolutionary idea.
At the absolute heart of Shivaji's rebellion was this electrifying concept of Hindavi Swarajya. Now, this meant more than just self-rule. It was a call for a sovereign state, one that was rooted in Hindu culture and tradition. This was a direct challenge to the authority of the sultanates and the Mughal Empire. This idea right here became the ideological bedrock of his entire movement.
So, by the time of his death in 1680, Shivaji's vision was a reality. Now, you might look at that first number and think, 4.1% of the subcontinent, that doesn't sound like much. But those numbers don't tell the whole story. This was a highly strategic, incredibly well-defended state. It was anchored by almost 300 forts, protected by tens of thousands of soldiers, and, get this, it even had a powerful navy on the west coast, which was unheard of at the time. He had built a fortress state.
Shivaji's death kicked off the empire's greatest test, a grueling 27-year war against the full might of the Mughal emperor Aurangzeb. His son, Sambhaji, fought bravely, but was tragically captured and executed. But the Maratha spirit of resistance? It didn't die with him, not even close. Shivaji's other son, Rajaram, and then, remarkably, Rajaram's widow, Tarabai, led a relentless guerrilla war that just exhausted the Mughal army and its treasury.
You know, Shivaji's genius wasn't just on the battlefield. The man was a brilliant administrator. He established something called the Ashtapradhan, which was a council of 8 ministers that basically functioned like a modern cabinet, a really sophisticated system of governance. And see that title at the very top, the Peshwa, or Prime Minister? Keep that one in mind because it's about to become the most powerful position in the entire empire.
And that administrative structure he set up leads us straight into our second chapter, the rise of the Peshwas. That long, draining war with the Mughals basically set the stage for a really dramatic internal power shift that would completely redefine the empire.
So you're probably wondering, why did this shift happen? Well, after the war, Shivaji's successors started delegating immense authority to their prime ministers. And these early Peshwas were brilliant. Brilliant strategists and administrators who stabilized the state and then spearheaded this massive expansion. Their success made the position hereditary, and pretty soon, the Peshwa's court in Pune, not the king's court in Satara, was the real center of Maratha power. So under the Peshwas, the empire evolved into a confederacy. You had the Peshwa as the head in Pune, but the real power was spread out among these 5 powerful Maratha families who set up their own domains all across India. Now, this decentralized model was rocket fuel for their expansion, but it also created these powerful competing interests, which, as you can guess, would later prove to be fatal.
This confederacy model became the engine for an absolutely unprecedented wave of expansion. By the mid-18th century, the Marathas had hit their zenith. They had transformed from a regional power into a true pan-Indian empire.
Just look at this number. At its peak, around 1760, the Maratha sphere of influence covered a staggering 2.5 million square kilometers. To put that in perspective, that's roughly 2/3 the size of modern India. They were, without a doubt, the dominant military and political force on the subcontinent.
The Maratha armies just swept across the subcontinent. From the deserts of Rajputana to the rich plains of Bengal, their influence spread everywhere. They humbled the great powers of the south. But the ultimate symbols of their power? Those came in 1757, when they captured the old Mughal capital of Delhi. And then, just a year later, when their banners were flying in Peshawar, on the very edge of Afghanistan.
But, as we know, this kind of rapid expansion couldn't last forever. The empire's zenith was followed by a series of absolutely devastating conflicts that stopped its growth in its tracks and began a long, painful decline.
But here's the thing. A critical weakness was starting to emerge from within. As historian Kaushik Roy points out, their aggressive policies were alienating other Hindu powers like the Rajputs and the Jats. By treating potential allies as just subjects to be taxed, they found themselves dangerously isolated. And that isolation proved disastrous at the Third Battle of Panipat in 1761. A catastrophic defeat at the hands of an invading Afghan army just shattered their reputation of invincibility.
But the Marathas were resilient. You have to give them that. Under brilliant leaders like Mahadaji Shinde, they recovered. They even recaptured Delhi and reasserted their dominance up in the north. However, a new power was rising in the east, one that played by very different rules: the British East India Company. And the collision of these two powers would decide the fate of the entire subcontinent.
Their final struggle with the British played out across 3 wars. In the First Anglo-Maratha War, a united Maratha front actually handed the British a stunning defeat. But by the Second War, those internal rivalries we talked about had deepened. In a fatal miscalculation, the Peshwa himself sought British aid, a move that cost the Marathas control of Delhi. And by the Third and Final War, the Confederacy's disunity was complete. The British exploited their divisions, defeating the great Maratha houses one by one and extinguishing the empire for good.
But even in defeat, the Marathas left behind an absolutely formidable military legacy. For more than a century, their armies were the most feared and respected fighting force in India.
It's really fascinating to see how the Maratha army changed over time. You see, Shivaji had built a national army with a unified command structure, but under the Peshwas, it became a feudal system where different chiefs supplied their own mercenary forces. Now, while this brought in all sorts of diverse skills from across Asia and even Europe, it came at a high cost. Loyalty was to the individual chief, not the empire, which fatally weakened its cohesion.
You know, maybe the greatest testament to their fighting skill comes from the man who conquered them at Panipat, Ahmad Shah Abdali. He admitted that even in defeat, the sheer ferocity of the Maratha attack on that day was so overwhelming that it would have shattered any other army in the world.
And that respect was shared by their final adversary. This warning came from Arthur Wellesley. Yeah, the future Duke of Wellington, the guy who defeated Napoleon. He gave this stark warning to his fellow British officers. The Maratha infantry skill in close-quarters combat was just legendary. And coming from one of history's greatest generals, that's about the highest praise you can get.
So, after this spectacular rise and this dramatic fall, what is the enduring legacy of the Maratha Empire?
The story of the Marathas really leaves us with this powerful what-if. They were the last major Indian power to stand against the British conquest. And you just have to wonder, how different would the course of history have been if the great houses of the Confederacy had put aside their rivalries and faced the rising British threat with that same unity they had shown just a generation earlier?
If you found this deep dive valuable, we've got a lot more like it in our South Asia History playlist. And for more explainers that cut right through the noise, make sure to subscribe to Notebook Summaries. Thanks for watching.